The principle of aid to those fighting the Axis was tested once again when German and Axis forces invaded the Soviet Union on 22nd June 1941. This was a more difficult decision because the arsenal of democracy had not been intended to support totalitarian regimes, and popular hostility to the Soviet Union and domestic communism was widespread. One State Department official, Samuel Breckinridge Long, noted in his diary in July: "The great majority of our people have learned that communism is something to be suppressed and the enemy of law and order. They do not understand how we can align ourselves even a little with it. Even interventionist organizations content to aid Britain were hostile to the idea of extending it to the Soviet Union, since the object, according to a statement issued by the interventionist Fight for Freedom movement, was to extend democracy, not to limit it." The British response almost certainly helped Roosevelt to decide what to do. Churchill pledged unconditional support on 22nd June, and a week later, Soviet officials in London provided an expansive list of the aid the Soviet Union wanted. The first goods released had still to be paid for, but on 4 September, the British government agreed that a form of Lend Lease in all but name would be used to cover the supplies to the Soviet Union, many of which would in practice be goods sent to Britain from the United States under the same scheme. A few days after the German invasion, Roosevelt used a news conference to announce that the United States, too, was going to give all the aid we possibly can to Russia, and he ordered the unfreezing of $40 million of Soviet assets so that any goods supplied could be paid for. On 26 June, the Soviet ambassador Konstantin Umansky made a formal request for aid, and a few days later, an extravagant shopping list arrived from Moscow, which included not only requests for aircraft, tanks, and munitions, but for entire factories for the production of light alloys, tires, and aviation fuel. This was not only well beyond what the United States was capable of delivering in 1941, but there was no certainty that the Soviet Union would survive the German assault. The prevailing view in both London and Washington assumed a German victory within a few months, which would mean Western supplies falling into German hands. Only after Hopkins returned from a trip to Moscow in late July, confident that the Soviet war effort was not about to collapse, did Roosevelt finally agree on 2 August to give all economic assistance practicable. But, as in the British case, aid had to be paid for and was slow to materialize. In London, there were fears that an American program for the Soviet Union would mean less for Britain. Lord Beaverbrook, Minister of Supply, wanted British control over the flow of aid to the new ally by allocating a fraction of the Lend-Lease goods sent to Britain, but the American side refused. Only following the meeting in Moscow in October was a firm commitment made by the two states under a first protocol, there were to be four in all, together to supply a total of 1.5 million tons of goods and equipment between October 1941 and June 1942. As American opinion began to swing in favor of aid to the Soviet Union, Roosevelt asked and got approval from Congress to treat Soviet supplies as if they were Lend Lease and thus vital to the defense of the United States, and from 7 November they no longer had to be paid for. The United States now became everyone's arsenal.